Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brittany Emery, and I am the Marketing Director at M2S Med Streaming. I'll be facilitating today's session. I just have a couple of quick housekeeping items to go over before we get started. The first is that we'll be muting all participant lines. However, we do encourage you to submit questions. You can do that using the Q&A box, and then we'll use those questions to guide our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And then also we will be recording today's session. So if there's anything you want to go back and reference, or if you want to pass the recording on to a colleague, we will send out that link once we process that recording, and we'll send that by email to all the participants. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to our first presenter, Dr. Jens Jorgensen. Dr. Jorgensen is Medical Director of VQI and Vascular Surgeon from Maine Medical Center.
Okay, thanks very much, Brittany, and good afternoon, everybody. Next slide, please. Do I have control? I guess I do. All right, thanks.
Yeah, I have it, Hans.
Okay. The mission of the VQI is to improve the quality, safety, effectiveness, and cost of healthcare by collecting and exchanging information. So, in short, using data to improve vascular care. There are three components to the Vascular Quality Initiative. We are organized under the auspices of a patient safety organization, and we have 13 procedural and 1 non-procedural registry collecting data on the full spectrum of arterial, venous, and hemodialysis access care. One of the unique things about our registry is that in addition to the index hospitalization, we also collect follow-up out to 1 year and longer. We have 18 regional study groups that all meet biannually to discuss outcomes and to work on quality improvement projects. And our third component is our web-based data collection and reporting system that is done in partnership with our commercial technology partner, M2S Med Streaming. We provide anonymous benchmarking reports to hospitals and physicians so they can see their own performance on process measures and outcomes in comparison to regional and national benchmarks. This allows them to have actionable data that they can focus on for quality improvement projects. We are a voluntary registry, but have had steady growth since we went national from New England back in 2010. And you can see that there is broad distribution across the country with a continued steady increase in participation. It really is the defined vascular registry for quality improvement. Next slide. Here's the listing of our 13 procedural and 1 non-procedural registry, the Vascular Medicine Consult. And as you can see, these registries cover the full spectrum of arterial and venous care. And even the smallest registry, except for the very newest ones, have over 10,000 procedures within them. So it's really a robust source of data for analysis. We have over 800,000 procedures in the registry, adding 10,000 procedures per month, with over 250,000 in our largest registry, the Peripheral Vascular Intervention Registry. One of the things that we are really most proud of is that we feel that the registry reflects real-world practice and real-world evidence. 1/3 of our participants, or slightly less than 1/3, are academic centers. About 1/3 are teaching hospitals, and about 40% are community hospitals, vein centers, office-based laboratories. So again, really representing the full spectrum, with over 6,000 specialists and about 800 centers. One of the things that we're really most proud of is less than half of our participants are vascular surgeons, and we have strong representation from both interventional cardiology, interventional radiology, as well as general surgery, neurosurgery, CT surgery, and others. We try to be a very collaborative organization. Last year, the NCDR PVI merged their registry with VQI, so we work very closely with ACC and NCDR and have good representation from them on all of our registry committees and councils. We also have partnerships or endorsing relationships with the Society for Vascular Medicine, American Heart Association, Society for Vascular Ultrasound, American Venous Forum, and the Vascular Access Society of America. Some of the characteristics is that data integrity is, of course, very important to us. So consecutive cases are audited by claims data. We encourage one-year follow-up for key outcomes, and that encompasses about 70% of our cases. We can also look at long-term survival using the Social Security Death Index. We also have a project to link our data with Medicare claims. So for all of those who are in Medicare, we can get late follow-up and late interventions for indeterminately. Again, just to emphasize that this is real-world evidence with a broad spectrum of academic and community centers. We have granular data on the device types in our PVI registry as of October 2016. We've been including good ID, so we have unique device identifiers in there, as well as all the other registries. It's just been brought to my attention that my mirroring does not work, and so the lettering behind me may be backwards. I apologize. I've hit the mirror and unmirror button a couple of times. In any event, we have granular clinical data on the patient's comorbidities, device or lesion characteristics such as length of stenosis, calcification, and so on, which can be correlated with devices as well as with follow-up. If somebody wishes to do a study looking at unique variables, they can be customized and added and collected with specific centers, as well as with unique follow-up or long-term follow-up periods for specific projects. And we've done this on a couple of occasions in the past. The primary mission of VQI is really to improve the care of vascular patients by providing feedback to hospital and physicians about their performance. And we also have a quality improvement section led by a nurse with specific expertise in quality improvement that provides guidance and support for quality improvement projects at other hospitals. Because regulated devices are used in many vascular procedures, their safety and effectiveness are key to good outcomes, and it's important for us to understand their performance. So evaluating vascular devices is an important part of our mission and provides an opportunity for partnering with device manufacturers and the FDA and European notified bodies. This is just an example of some of the devices that can be identified in the PVI registry. You can see that we collect balloons, stents, special stents, including drug-eluting stents, drug-coated balloons, cutting balloons, atherectomy devices. In carotid endarterectomy, we have patch type. In endovascular aneurysm repair, we have the different stent graft types. So as you read through the list here, you can see that for each of these registries, we have the sort of specific device information that is important for analysis. Next slide. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Dr. Cronoway.
Thanks, Jens, and welcome everyone today. As Jens has just laid out, the VQI registry, although originally designed and still obviously focused on quality improvement for patient care, provides a real opportunity to also evaluate devices, because the outcome measures that are being collected for these patients apply to the devices. And it's very clear from both the FDA and the European Union that the use of real-world evidence is important for device evaluation, in part because it's more generalizable than the pre-market studies, which have to be more focused, and also because it can examine the total product life cycle of the device after it's been released. And this has been portrayed in a number of documents from the FDA, such as the ones on the screen. And we're pleased to have with us for comments later today Denise Amarnish-Davidge and Ken Kavanaugh from FDA, who will provide some commentary from their perspective. What I'm going to do is give an overview of the opportunities available for device manufacturers to use data from VQI. There is a value proposition for doing this, and it centers around the fact that the VQI offers an existing network of hospitals and physicians who are already collecting much of the needed data and are familiar with the definitions and the data entry process. As Jens mentioned, for specific industry projects, we can add customized fields or follow-up times that only show up for the participating centers. The PSO structure allows all the patients who are treated in the hospital to be enrolled because under the PSO regulations, patient consent is not required since we're evaluating standard of care practice. In addition, because M2S has contracts with all the existing centers, it's much easier to contract a center to participate in an industry project simply by an addendum to their existing contract with M2S and the PSO. And finally, the PSO can release de-identified data and at the same time can go back to centers and resolve any questions that arise in a privileged communication methodology, even obtaining source documents as necessary. So theoretically, the result should be rapid, efficient, flexible, and more cost effective. And I'll show you some data in a few minutes about cost effectiveness. So if we think about how can we use the data from VQI, the main areas where we have been successful and had good projects is around post-approval surveillance that may be required by FDA as a part of a device approval, expanding indications based on off-label use since all cases are collected in VQI, using the data for more contemporary objective performance goals or providing control patients for new devices, meeting EU MDR requirements, and even working with CMS on reimbursement requirements for new devices. So I'll walk you through each of these briefly, but importantly today we're going to talk about a few new opportunities. One is the use of matched Medicare claims data to improve long-term follow-up and make it more efficient, evaluating devices that aren't captured in the VQI registry, and we're really happy to have Ken Oriel here with us today from Syntaxic and NAMSA, because we're going to talk about or really announce publicly the possibility to nest a pre-market trial in the VQI registry using this collaboration with NAMSA. So perhaps our most activity has been in the area of post-approval surveillance projects. And in this scenario, obviously the manufacturer works with FDA and VQI to develop a pragmatic protocol that fits a real-world registry so that the data collection requirements are appropriate, the follow-up time points, imaging, et cetera, meet the standard of care definitions. A steering committee is appointed by the VQI with sponsor input, and that committee takes general oversight of the project, helps review data, looks at the analyses, and prepares scientific publications. All the VQI centers are invited to participate. They're reviewed and selected by the steering committee, again with input from the sponsor, and also with input from the VQI registry to know what their volumes have actually been and what their accuracy in terms of data reporting and follow-up has been. And then project management for these post-approval projects is done by an experienced M2S team that takes care of site contracting and communication, data monitoring, reporting, the more modest CRO functions that are required for post-approval studies. In these situations, the SVS PSO provides the industry sponsor with a copy of the data, if you will, line by line individual patient data. They are, of course, de-identified for patient, provider, and hospital to follow the PSO regulations. The sponsor knows who the participating centers are. They just don't know which data came from which center. And all the data are de-identified so that dates and things are converted to intervals, et cetera. And then the sponsor can use this data for analysis to meet regulatory requirements or marketing, the only caveat being that marketing needs to be approved by the PSO to be sure the it is accurately interpreted. And then, as I said, the steering committee takes responsibility for scientific publications in consultation with the sponsor. One of our first examples and one of our largest projects is just exemplified on this slide. It was a joint protocol with 2 different manufacturers, 400 patients of acute and chronic aortic dissection. One of the most important observations was that the study was completed in half the time that was initially estimated because of this existing network. And through the first 2 years, the follow-up has been identical with the pre-market studies that were reported by the same 2 companies to the FDA. In terms of using the data to expand device indications, we know in the arterial space and even the venous space that many devices are being used for patients who weren't tested in the initial trials, and so they are, quote, off-label. And at the same time, individual physicians have to make decisions based on limited data that probably were not clarified in the initial IDE trial. So the FDA supports a more efficient method to refine indications based on appropriately comprehensive registry data, recognizing that manufacturers don't have a lot of incentive to mount a full IDE trial for an already marketed device. So in this setting, we've had several examples of projects that have been successfully completed using VQI data that resulted in expanded indications without an IDE requirement when the expansion to the new indication was not too far from the original, such as treating in-stent restenosis rather than a de novo atherosclerotic lesion, or extending the length of lesions for which the device was initially approved for treatment. And these are just examples of the type of data that can be acquired through VQI when a device is used off-label and potentially support a labeling change. It's been valuable to use VQI data to create contemporary objective performance goals. This has been done through the Rapid or Registry Assessment of Peripheral Interventional Devices project, which has been ongoing now for a number of years. In a recent publication by Danny Burgess and many co-authors from this private-public partnership of MD EpiNet, the Superficial Femoral Popliteal Evidence Development Project created contemporary outcomes for plain balloon angioplasty, stenting, and atherectomy, which can be used by manufacturers as they start to assess new devices. And in that regard, VQI data has been used specifically by selected manufacturers to provide propensity match control patients so that the group being used exactly matches up with the device that was tested by the manufacturer. And because of the very large number of cases in VQI, it's been possible to obtain a 2-to-1 or even higher ratio of matching to achieve a well-matched control cohort. Everyone is now aware, of course, of the need to meet the EU medical device reporting requirements in order to maintain CE marking. The notified bodies have indicated that they really prefer some type of benchmark comparison, and one of the advantages of using VQI data is that a particular company's device can be compared anonymously with all others using the same evaluation system which should eliminate any bias. And to date, we've provided over 25 such reports that seem to have been met with good approval. They've been well received, and in part because they represent validated real-world data. They've been, we are told, more cost-effective and seem to be perceived as more valid because they're based on a society-sponsored registry rather than a proprietary industry registry. And then finally, in this list of topics or projects that we've already completed, as you know, for CMS may require ongoing registry reporting, so-called coverage with evidence development for Medicare beneficiaries. The TCAR, or transcarotid artery revascularization procedure, was approved for the Silk Road product for Medicare funding if the data about that procedure and follow-up were submitted to the VQI registry in order to allow the analyses and publications that the agency would need for future national coverage decisions around carotid stenting. So since 2016, when this project was launched, just even under 5 years now, there have been over 22,000 cases from more than 500 centers that have been reported that have already resulted in 17 publications. So this has been viewed positively by CMS. It's a efficient data collection mechanism using the VQI registry data that we think will be an opportunity for other new devices and new technologies going forward. So let me just briefly tell you a little bit about, I said I'd talk to you about cost effectiveness. We did a project with analysts and colleagues at FDA to look at the financial aspects of post-market evaluation. So just to put it in perspective, the cost to industry, if you will, the industry sponsor funds whatever the additional costs are to develop the registry if new data elements need to be incorporated and for project management. And centers that participate receive payment for entering additional data or additional follow-ups that they would not normally enter into VQI. The good thing about this is it's a uniform payment to each site, and therefore it's much less difficult to negotiate on the front end. So we did a return on investment analysis, if you will, with the FDA to look at these the cost of these projects. And so to do that, we looked at the first 6 studies that were done using VQI data to support a regulatory decision. The companies and the devices are listed here. All these projects required custom data elements, 5-year follow-up, and were done just as I just explained. And what the FDA analysts did was to compare what the manufacturers paid for these projects to VQI with the estimated cost that they would have incurred had they done it independently using a counterfactual cost model that was developed and published by Resnick et al. And so if you look through this, as I said, these were large projects, a lot of imaging, long-term follow-up. And if you cut to the chase and look at the bottom, the per patient cost for doing these extensive post-approval studies through VQI was $10,000 per patient compared to the estimate of $26,000 per patient, which was a pretty significant return on investment for using the registry. Also, the time to enroll patients, as I showed you earlier in one other slide, was significantly reduced in post-approval studies by 45% and in the label expansion projects by 71%. This was a very significant savings for industry across these 6 projects. And the explanation for this, as we've implied earlier, is the value added by using an existing network of centers, avoiding dual data entry, an existing mechanism for data collection, simple extension of contracts. And we believe going forward, as I'll mention in a moment, that there's an opportunity for further cost reduction when we start to incorporate Medicare claims for long-term follow-up. So here we are, the Medical Device Epidemiology Network project, the VISION Coordinated Registry Network. This, which has been organized by Art Sadrakian and Phil Goodney, have now successfully matched Medicare claims data with VQI data. So VQI has all the granular patient identified data from the front end, and using claims, they have been able to add important outcomes that can be determined from claims, such as late mortality, reintervention, late rupture after aneurysm repair, amputation after lower extremity intervention. And you can see that when devices have been, in this case, in the VQI registry for 15 years, they've been able to report reintervention rates out to 15 years in a very efficient way. And we think this will have good opportunity both to improve follow-up for patients who are lost to follow-up, and where it's been validated to be accurate, even to potentially substitute for the costly long-term follow-up. What about devices that are not captured in the VQI registry? We know that the EU MDR may require evaluation of such devices, such as catheters and guide wires that we take for granted, but which we don't track precisely in registries. M2S has now developed a mechanism to create custom registries fairly efficiently to capture such data. We've done this now with both VQI and non-VQI centers. The data are submitted by centers as a quality improvement project under healthcare operations. Both the hospitals and the sponsors receive an aggregate report of outcomes that are specified by the sponsor that will meet the EU MDR requirements. And our feedback from the first project that we've just finished was that it was more efficient, more rapid, and was able to be reported to the EU MDR again as a non-biased project independent of the particular manufacturer. And so we think this is an opportunity in some cases to expand this to any device type. So lastly, and perhaps most excitedly today, because we've never done this before, we want to talk a bit about the opportunity to expand the use of the VQI registry to pre-market trials. And as you all know, there are additional higher level regulations that have to be applied to these studies, including the IRB approval, informed consent, et cetera. But we believe that we could benefit this by leveraging, again, the existing VQI network, including historical insight into the center's volume and their data completeness. By supplementing the existing VQI data forms with whatever variables are needed, we avoid the need for double data entry at the site, and we also use the uniform variables and definitions that have been approved by the specialty societies. So we've had discussions that have been productive with Syntactics and NAMSA and M2S to work out some details to try to imagine how we would nest a pre-market trial in the VQI registry with the appropriate CRO support that would be needed from NAMSA. And we're very pleased to have Ken Oriole, the Chief Medical Officer of NAMSA, with us today to talk a little bit more about that. Ken?
Thanks, Jack. And clearly, we all know we've used VQI, and thanks to the SVS and M2S med streaming, it's a great tool, and it's been proven to be helpful in the post-market setting. It only seems natural to extend that to the pre-market setting. And in other words, how do you get a device approved? Can we leverage the VQI for pre-market studies? And I was privileged to speak with Jack and with M2S and SVS. And we put our heads together to see if this could be something that with the CRO, M2S MedStream and VQI could be useful for pre-market studies. So clearly, VQI is mature. It's a well-functioning database, proved for a decade or more, real-world evidence. There are remaining gaps in that system, but not many. And if we can fill those gaps, then we'll be able to use M2S, MedStreaming, and VQI with the help of the SVS to improve enrollment in particular, choosing sites, and really executing in the pre-market setting to come up with a strategy for regulatory approval of medical devices. So the combination of these stakeholders, and importantly with the SVS and other societies, we think we can put things together with a CRO, and it could be Syntactics and NAMSA. We'd love to do that to offer a unique solution to the investigators and to the industry stakeholders to solve some of the challenges of traditional clinical trial execution. Next slide. So if you look at the bottom of this slide, I'll start there first. These are the usual graphs we see. On the left, that's enrollment in a clinical trial, and on the right, these are the sites that are in that trial. And there are some significant challenges that remain even today. And those challenges principally have to do with, number one, picking the right sites, and number two, enrollment in a predictable and reasonably efficient timeframe. So let's talk about the unmet challenges that currently impede clinical trial execution. And I think these things underlie the cost savings, same cost savings that Jack has shown us have been or can be realized in the post-market setting. We feel they might also be evident in the pre-market setting. So the first is clinical site selection. How do we choose investigators and sites? And I can tell you that really there are only two things that people look at, two important things that people look at to identify sites. And the first, and this is really a line in the sand, there has to be research experience. Doesn't matter what else happens, but there has to be integrity of data, which means having people at the site that have experience. Number two, once that's satisfied, you have to have adequate volume of patients that meet the eligibility criteria of the study. And to identify sites, well, what do we do? Well, we have kind of a subjective idea of how people have performed in the past, but VQI offers an opportunity to actually look at what people have done, granted post-market setting, but what have these sites done with VQI and with data? The other thing we can do is when we go to analyze what sites we should include in a trial, we ask the investigators, well, how many patients do you think you might see over the course of a month or a year for this indication? You usually have to divide that by a number. The problem is we don't really know what that number is. I think it's probably about 5 or 6. But with VQI, we can actually go back and we can almost input the eligibility criteria of a trial, and we can see which sites have the most patients that meet the eligibility criteria. So clearly there are some advantages or potential advantages with clinical site selection. What about site contracting and startup? It's really the same as what we've heard for post-market studies. Traditionally, this is a long and sometimes underestimated phase in a clinical trial. And by using the contracts that are already up for VQI and using addendums, there are some at least potential advantages over what we currently do. The third is speed of enrollment. And of all of the things in a clinical trial, this is the one thing that the sponsor, meaning industry, the CRO, and even the investigators can't control. It's not under our control to do this. And this is the part that is often underestimated and is responsible for huge costs that are well over what were predicted. And the last thing is follow-up compliance. And I think it really was the DCB problem that came to our attention a few years ago. And with that, with the studies, we saw that there was a lot of missing data. If we have endpoints that are only, let's say, 6 months or a year out, well, we'll be okay with follow-up in most cases. But when we need to see endpoints that are 5 years out, even more, there's going to be a lot of missing data. And with VQI, at least we have the potential to solve some of the missingness. Next slide. So these are some of the gaps that I've tried to put in a table here. And we'll start with some of the pivotal clinical trial requirements. Pivotal meaning a trial designed for regulatory approval. So the first thing is IDE submission and approval. Well, VQI probably is not going to help with an IDE submission or approval. There are some aspects they might, but CROs can. CROs are used to doing pre-submissions, IDEs, and breakthrough device designation. But CROs can get data from VQI that will help in the IDE submission process. The second, we've already covered site selection, and I'm going to predict that within a couple of weeks, there will be more than 800 active clinical sites in VQI. And I've already gone over how that data can really help with site selection. And no longer will we have to guess or have an investigator guess how many patients they might see at their site for a given indication. Third, long-term follow-up. And we can use VQI to do that. Granted, most of the data on the post-market side is 1 year, but we already know that can be longer. It's a very small change to make sure that we can extend the normal functions of VQI to 3, 5, or even longer years of follow-up. Data integrity, that is one of the things that I think as a biggest risk to a clinical trial. It's also the biggest risk to a manufacturer or even to a CRO. We've seen over the last few years several manuscripts that were published with data that just wasn't correct. There were mistakes that were made there. By taking VQI and linking it or even embedding standard electronic data capture systems, we can, in part, solve some of the problems that might occur with data integrity. Now, the next item is what Jack's already covered. double data entry. And when we think of an electronic data capture system for a clinical trial, it really isn't double data entry. It can even be triple data entry. And that means more time and more mistakes. By using systems, APIs, auto transfer of data from VQI, we can, where necessary, put that data into a standard electronic data capture system, embedded, if you will, within VQI, and therefore avoid the double data entry. Monitoring of data, also something that goes along with data integrity. Now, it used to be, and still is to some degree, on-site monitoring. But if there's one thing that the COVID pandemic taught us, is that we can use remote solutions. And by incorporating what a CRO does with VQI, we'll be able to monitor data, not always on site. Often it might need to be on site, but more and more we're going to see new remote ways of ensuring data integrity through remote monitoring. The next is complaint data analysis. Compliant data analysis. And with a CRO, we have standard variables, SAS programmers, all of the things that can be done in an academic medical center, but by using the people and processes in a CRO, we think that can go quick. Presentation of data, it's really both VQI and a CRO. The VQI, SVS in particular, have key opinion leaders. They can assess the data, they can present the data. Well, what can a CRO do? A CRO can configure tables, listings, and figures, what we call TLFs, for review, and we can construct those TLFs in a manner that is what FDA is used to, for instance. And lastly, IDE approval. Well, the CRO can, again, go back to the regulatory strategists. We can produce a clinical study report. We can do the PMA or 510K submission, whatever is required, and we'll use data and the sites generated by VQI, SVS, M2S, and MedStreaming to do that in an efficient fashion. Next slide. I think I'll turn it over now to the discussants, Ken Cavanaugh and Danica Marinek-Dabik.
Thanks very much, Ken. And I'm not sure who would like to go first, but Ken Cavanaugh, would you like to start? And Ken is the Deputy Director in the Office of Health Technologies, specifically the cardiovascular section, so is very involved with this on the pre-market side, and we'd love your comments. This is a brand new launch of this potential for nesting pre-market trials. The press release just came out the middle of last week, so it's hot off the press. Ken, thank you for joining us.
No, thanks, Jack, for inviting me, and thanks everybody for joining in. I hope the presentation was useful. I certainly found it interesting, not only to hear about the full scope of activities as they relate to the United States, but also worldwide, as our center is working in a more global environment and thinking more about global strategies for medical devices, how that can all be incorporated. I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. There were a few points I guess I would amplify that were already said. I guess one point I really wanted to emphasize was the idea of, I guess, doing a non-traditional study, whether it's a randomized controlled trial or even just a single arm study. It's not a new approach for cardiovascular devices, and in particular not new for vascular device studies. I've been with cardiovascular devices since the early 2000s, and during that entire time it's been very challenging to do the vascular studies, at least compared to my counterparts who primarily work on cardiac therapies, just due to the various specialties involved, the challenging disease, the smaller patient population. And so really for vascular devices, we've really been wanting to push the envelope in terms of, okay, what is the balance here between making a study able to be done and still having some scientifically robust data at the end of it. And by following a lot of the approaches that were discussed here, we found a balance. We found a good way to accomplish that. So it won't be the first time we hear proposals like this, if in fact it's an approach that you choose to pursue. We definitely feel that like nesting studies within registries is a really valuable mechanism for broadening the enrollment. In other words, not just selecting sites that are considered centers of excellence, but from more from smaller institutions, from community-based institutions. They can help fill in gaps in patient diversity, physician experience, specialty diversity, other factors like that. These are somewhat unsung factors when it comes to evaluating the safety and effectiveness of a device, but they are evaluated, whether it's to make an initial marketing approval decision or thinking about post-market surveillance expectations. So really being able to tap into that resource can be very valuable as well. We would definitely see that as a strong point of this type of approach. While it's not really an FDA issue per se, I would like to highlight some of the points that Dr. Royale just made in terms of the use of a mechanism like VQI really helping with a site recruitment aspects of doing a study. As our center has gotten more involved with just the clinical trial ecosystem as a whole, we've learned a lot about the non-regulatory aspects of doing a study. And while we only have some limited purview in terms of addressing some of those considerations, we like to know about them and know how they're affecting the ability to collect safety and effectiveness data in a timely manner. And so if there is a way to more quickly get study sites on board because they've already been involved or reusing the same infrastructure, we definitely see that as a benefit by shrinking the time it takes to collect that information. We would also just consider really like with any study, again, some of the points that Dr. Royale just mentioned in terms of looking at the robustness of the data. It's really important to minimize the loss to follow-up to ensure the accuracy of the information being entered, and really to also have pre-specified goals for a lot of these analyses. To make it clear to us there wasn't any bias or confounding involved, and that you set a goal and then you found a data set without knowing in advance how that data set was going to compare to that goal. And finally, just from, I guess, like a regulatory strategy standpoint, many of you probably already know about this or have heard it from FDA before, but would really recommend the use of our pre-submission process to discuss strategies like this. I think it's really the informal way we can discuss back and forth how to best develop a regulatory and clinical strategy for evaluating devices in this way. Depending on what your goals are, we could share our respective lessons learned and try to hone in on what the appropriate strategy is. Really, it's best to do this once you know what your plans are. It's such that you can make course corrections as soon as possible once you hear our feedback. I think this can also really help with, just to get back to my earlier point, with evaluations that have a multi-regional aspect to them. So if you want to use data from VQI or really any registry source to address regulatory goals in the United States as well as the European Union or Japan or elsewhere, we'd like to hear about that just so we can be clear, okay, maybe there's some expectations from other regulatory agencies. It's not what we would think would be ideal, or it's not our first recommendation, but we could live with this. We could understand that by collecting the data in this way and meeting multi-regional goals where we can still accomplish our goal as well. So just even hearing about those plans, I think, can be helpful, and not just focusing on the US aspect, just talking about the global aspects as well. So I just wanted to, I guess, focus on a few of those points and point out really where nesting this study within a registry like VQI can be especially attractive, and it won't be the first time we've heard about it. I guess that would be my main message. Those are really the only comments I had. I'm happy to stay on for any questions. Now I'll turn it over to Denise.
Thanks very much, Ken. I would point out one other thing that hasn't been brought up yet, but in terms of selecting centers, one of the other opportunities of looking at the existing registry data is to try to select centers that might provide the appropriate representation of underserved or minority populations, or the groups that sometimes aren't involved in the pivotal trial. So it's another potential advantage. Thank you for your comments. And our next commenter is Dr. Denitsa Marinic-Dabic, who's the Associate Director in the Office of Clinical Evidence Development and someone who has been a champion of the use of real-world evidence. Denitsa, we're very happy that you could join us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Ken. I'm going to try to build on what we've heard today by taking a step back and recognizing a very unique role that VQI registry had played in the ecosystem development. The reason why I would like to make some of these points first is that the opportunity that we've heard today about nesting the pre-market clinical trial in a registry has many of the different aspects of how we can look at this. But I think sustainability of infrastructure and the quality and integrity of the data and the strength of the machinery that comes with VQI is also really important to consider as we think about the next steps. So I'd like to talk about the 5 different aspects or values that VQI had brought to the overall development of the national infrastructure, and certainly for articulation of our vision for establishing of the national evaluation system for health technology in the United States. So the first one would be the strategic aspect. I'm sure you've heard about the concept of strategically coordinated registry network. VQI had been growing into from the role of the traditional registry to the really leading role of the strategically coordinated registry network in the vascular space. But by that, what we mean, they made really first efforts and certainly leading the pack in development of the interoperability ways of linking with other data sources. We've heard Dr. Kranovet talking about Vision CRN that evolved from the VQI as a strong core, meaning linkages, strategic linkages with the claims data, which obviously bring the whole new value of the registry as a data source. So this is really important because if you plan to have a pre-market clinical trials in the registry itself, having the ability to have a trust in the linkages capacity of the registry with a lot of innovative methods of how one can really resolve some of these unknown gaps in the quality of the data can be a valuable asset in planning the long-term follow-up studies, regardless of what FDA is asking you to do. We may ask for 1 year. You may want to know what's happening more than 1 year. So again, that strategic aspect and the quality of the data and validation that had happened thus far should not be underestimated as a really great example of how registry can actually be very much part of the overall ecosystem in a relatively seamless way by the contribution of the academia, industry, others that had been patient advocacy groups and others that had actually worked together to make VQI what it is today. So that's one angle, which I think it's really important to consider. The second one is the value of VQI thus far in the regulatory setting in terms of the number of studies that utilize the VQI as a data source. And we again heard from Dr. Kranovet about studies that we even use for the return on investment analysis to demonstrate the value of the registry and utilization of the national infrastructure, comparing to one-off studies that had been the practice thus far. As you know, several weeks ago, we've released a report on the subset, on the actual 90 studies that use real-world evidence that led to regulatory decision-making over the past 10 years. And I'm sure you're going to recognize a lot of examples from this area in the report itself. But the point being is the regulatory contribution of VQI is another one that I think should be underscored here, because this track record actually can lead to more successes in the future. Number 3 is, and Dr. Kavanagh mentioned that as well, it's about the international role of VQI in the space. You know about the International Consortium of Vascular Registry, again, established by a tireless effort of Dr. Kranovet and colleagues from VQI, which now has over 14 different registries from many countries, from Europe and other continents, including our own. which already have a number of studies underway to actually test the value of this international consortia. Again, that can be another way of how you can potentially think about nesting the future studies in it. Number 4 value, I would say, is VQI also and Vision CRN led the effort of very novel methods that can be developed utilizing registry data. One of them, for example, is the development of the objective performance criteria, which in fact can serve the industry very well by really making the evidence generation much more efficient, less costly, and leading to the regulatory decision much faster. That's one of the areas in methodology development. Another one has to do with the validation studies that were done by the vascular CRN in terms of leveraging better the claims data and solving the issues such as laterality that had not been necessarily always captured properly. So again, there are a number of examples in which vascular space led this effort. And finally, I would like to, as a physician and epidemiologist, I would like to also highlight the role of VQI in a public health arena by serving that example of how the leader in this space could look like. We were able to leverage the lessons learned from vascular space in many other clinical areas, including the hernia registry, including the neurovascular space and many others, when we often sent the new registry leaders to actually have the discussion with Dr. Kranovet and others in the field to help ignite the enthusiasm how the growth of the registry could look like. So to sum these sort of remarks, I would say that there is a great foundation in VQI registry. There is also great outer layers of the infrastructure components that gravitated to the registry because of the wealth of knowledge and because of the strength of the infrastructure, which I think could serve as a great basis for creating this reliable and also relevant data source moving forward for the companies to consider in nesting the pre-market clinical trials.
Thanks very much, Denitsa. Very appreciate your comments and your support in this area. A lot of what has been accomplished, we've really done in partnership with FDA, especially through the MD EpiNet program. And you know, just to go back to a comment that you made, Ken, I think one of the things that we found, and I think Ken Oriole would share this, is that the value of having an open discussion with FDA colleagues in the pre-submission phase to sort out the opportunities and understand, you know, what the best fit may be. And I think when we look to our first opportunities to nest a pre-market trial in VQI, working with NAMSA, we really want to take advantage of that opportunity and you know, make sure it works out and that it's well suited, you know, for that particular application.
Yeah, Jack, I couldn't agree more. It always baffles me why someone doesn't want to do a pre-sub. It doesn't cost anything, and you get FDA almost feeling like a partner in the whole process, and no surprises later on. It's amazing when you do something without talking about it, or if you even have a pre-sub and you don't follow what FDA tells you, and then, whoops, you're in the PMA situation and you still have additional design considerations, quote. So I would really suggest pre-subs. And I know we could even have a pre-sub on this, right? It doesn't have to be Ken and Denise, you tell me, but I think you can have a pre-sub on what we're doing right here. It doesn't have to be a specific project. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that is correct. I mean, there can be, I mean, the value, I guess, of the feedback you get back can be proportional to how specific your plans have been established so far. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot we could even say just now in terms of general study considerations to keep in mind, how to think about maybe the potential goals for a study, you know, those kinds of considerations. I definitely recognize that the money cost for a pre-sub is zero, but the time cost can be a factor for people, especially now under COVID, when many groups have been forced to reprioritize and do other things. I think we try to schedule the discussions as best we can. We don't want to rush them. We want to make sure that we come into those meetings having thought through all the factors involved and being able to give you the best possible advice. And we have timelines we need to meet there, and we definitely try our best to meet them. But yeah, we generally suggest having those discussions once there is something concrete to discuss on, such that we can provide some meaningful feedback that way.
Great. Well, we've asked people to send in write comment or questions in the chat box. We've had several. There's a question here, Denise, that I might refer to you about. Can you see? You can see the question, I think. You can read it. You're muted, Denise.
Okay. So yes, how are the companies covered from sharing of knowledge and learnings? I.e., how can we change our case support based on the data if we are not managing it? So I'll start with the response, and maybe Ken will add to it. The idea here is that when I mentioned sharing the knowledge and learnings from one area to another, I was referring primarily to a pre-competitive space when, in fact, there is a lot of issues related to the processes, governance, sustainability discussion, methodologies, how one solve particular gap in a particular methodological or other area, which can be very relevant to many clinical areas, and very agnostic actually, to what type of clinical area we are talking about. I know that there had been often issues raised about the actual what was the second part of this question. How can we change our case support based on the data if we're not managing it? That's something that probably the registry folks would be best suited to answer. I do believe that there is a strength of leverage that can be achieved by utilizing what exists as a solid infrastructure. And I think the modules within the registry, the ability to actually ensure and build the trust and understanding of what leads to the responsible transparency is something that obviously is subject for the discussion between the registry and the companies. And I don't know if Jack or others would like to respond to, or can maybe have some additional thoughts.
Sure. Well, I'll just add, what I would add to that, Denise, is there's always question around control and how can we have questions answered if we're not on site doing this. And I would say that you would look at the data source that coming in through VQI, just like you would if a CRF were being collected through a CRO. And what if it's pre or post market, we have the ability to go back to centers and obtain documentation, even source documents for any questions that come up during the analysis. So I think it's very much akin to any project that would be run by a company. And we're just handling the data through this really society adjudicated methodology. And one of the great advantages of that is the ability to compare a new device with others in the registry using the same system, the same biases. So it really, I think, adds actually extra value that is not obtainable if the study is done isolated. So, and I also realize that we're running out of time, but we do have a couple other questions. I guess one of the questions that came in was how does VQI engage with sites to increase long-term follow-up compliance? And just like in any trial that a manufacturer would do, we have a constant contact between the clinical team at M2S and the center in terms of notifying them when follow-up is available, is due, and then monitoring, reminding them, pestering them, if you will, to go out and get that follow-up, even virtually if they have to. And then now we have the ability where no follow-up can be obtained, instead of just dropping that patient from the whole cohort, as is done sometimes, we can look to Medicare claims and understand things from that. So I think we have actually additional opportunity. And I think the last question I think that we have time for is, maybe I'll throw this back to Ken or Denise. The question is, do you believe that FDA will consider the data quality to be equivalent to that of a sponsor-led investigation if we nested a pre-market study with VQI and NAMSA?
I mean, I could take the first attempt at answering that. I would say we certainly have done that before. I think we'd be looking at the same types of considerations. Again, did you have, from a quality perspective, did you have pre-specified hypothesis? What did the mix of patients look like? Was the follow-up sufficiently robust? I don't think we would hold a different bar for registry embedded studies. That's why I think it's important really just to establish up front what the expectations would be there. Maybe we can provide some recommendations for the level of quality control we'd be looking for here. I wouldn't say that just because it comes in as coming from a registry in the absence of, let's say, a protocol-driven ID study, we would say, there's no way we're going to accept this. No, that's really where the discussions ahead of time would be really helpful. For an ID, I say the difference with an ID study is for an ID, you send it to us, we review it, we have to approve it before that study can start in the United States. So by default, you're getting some feedback on what the study should look like and what features it should have. For something that doesn't require an ID, that you wouldn't always get that feedback unless you ask for it. And that's really why the pre-submission can be really helpful. Maybe your only way really to get a form of official feedback in terms of how to maximize the robustness of the study. So no, as long as we were looking at the same things we would look at for a traditional ID study in registry embedded studies. So I don't think the view of it would be any different as long as those elements are there.
Thank you, Ken. And I'm really sorry that we haven't had more time today, but we had a lot of ground to cover and we tried to move fast. But I would just like to remind everyone that either virtually through the phone or hopefully in person, many of you will be attending the SBS Vascular Annual Meeting in San Diego in August, and we will be having our usual FDA industry roundtable discussion, and we'll continue this where we left off today. If you have specific questions, you can reach out to Ron Anson or myself because M2S handles these industry projects for VQI. And hopefully we'll have an opportunity in August to again have Denitsa and Ken from FDA and others join us on that call. Greatly appreciate everybody's attendance today. Particularly happy to have announced this new collaboration with Ken Oriole and NAMSA. I think there's a real opportunity there that we hope to have even more news to talk to you about in August. So if you have a upcoming IDE pre-market trial, reach out to us. It would be great to work with you on that. And with that, I think we'll close the session and look forward to seeing you. We will make this recording available and we'll post that to people who signed up. If you have colleagues who were not able to attend that you think would like to see this, please feel free to share it with them. Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone.